All right, welcome to another live episode of geekoutdoors.com. And so in this week's episode, we're actually going to be talking about Google's AIY kit and Microsoft actually having their own version of Linux in a way. And so let's go ahead and start off with the very first bit of news, and that is Google's AIY, or do-it-yourself, artificial intelligence kit. Now, this is something that I have been talking about a lot over this past year and even before this, where I really feel artificial intelligence is the future, and along with all the other things that surround that, including data collection. And so all of this is all part of that, And so with that being said, whenever we do think about both intelligence, artificial intelligence, and data, we usually think about Google. And Google obviously knows this, and so they have officially released a do-it-yourself artificial intelligence kit. And this is something that I really think is going to be a lot more common, and I'll get into that here in a bit. And so the two main things that they are offering right now is a vision kit and also a voice kit. And so when you first look at this, the first thing that comes to my mind is something like this, the Nintendo Labo, which just is now available now actually. And so that's the first thing that came to my mind. And even before that is the Google Cardboard, okay? And so it's very simple on the outside, but what it's actually going to be able to do is extremely interesting in my opinion. And so let me show you what this has, and let me make sure this is working. And check real quick. All right, live stream is on. Okay, and so let me show you what's available in the kit. So let's start with the vision kit. So what you get here is you actually get an actual camera on this. So that's the reason why they call this a vision kit. And so this is what they provide to you. And for people who actually have done this before, where they have a Raspberry Pi and they've actually have Arduino boards and things like that, this is probably something very familiar to that group. And so Google is bringing more of this to the masses. Okay, so this is everything that you get in here. Okay, so the cardboard, there's the Raspberry Pi, there's the camera. I'm pretty sure that's the camera right there, and basically everything you need physical wise. And you could actually go through all this. Let me make sure that was the right one. Yeah, that is the camera right there. And so everything that you need all in one box. And then Google also provides you these very easy to follow instructions. Okay, and so the whole idea with these kits is to make it as easy as possible for people who aren't like super nerds and geeks to actually do this. Okay, so I'm pretty sure they've already installed the OS on here for Raspberry Pi. So all a person would have to do is just put it together, and so they don't have to worry about compatibility issues, or debugging or anything, at least initially, because all of it's done for you. And just by looking at these instructions, I think the majority of people can follow this. Okay, so let's go ahead and go all the way to the bottom, because I'm pretty impressed by how easy they make this. Okay, because I have not even done anything with Raspberry Pi myself, but if I had to do it myself, I'm pretty sure it would take me quite a while at the beginning to actually learn how to do it. Whereas if I had something like this, where everything is already been tested in terms of compatibility, I don't have to really worry about a lot of things. I just basically put it together, and then I could start experimenting with it. Okay, and so let's go all the way to the bottom, because when I first saw this, I was like, wow, that's pretty easy. I mean, there are a lot of steps, but as you can see, they go into every detail of this. And so by the time you're done, this will be a working vision AI kit. Okay, and so now you'll be able to use this to record things through video format, but it'll have AI involved with it. Okay, and so similarly, they have something for voice as well. And so that's a really interesting design. It's a speaker box, and so it goes through the same process as you can see here. Everything you need ready to go, and you just put it together. Okay, and also these actual devices are available at Target. You could get the Google Vision Kit for $89.99 and the Voice Kit for $49.99, and I think that is pretty reasonable. especially considering, you get everything that you need right away. Okay, and here are some other things right here. These are different machine models, and like I said, this is probably a lot more advanced than it looks. I think once you get it set up, you could pretty much do whatever you want with it. Okay, and then it'll probably get you into learning more about artificial intelligence. And so that's really the main point of why I wanted to talk about this, is because more and more people are actually using technology now than I think they've ever used technology, in my opinion. It's becoming more integrated, into our lives. Okay, and so that could actually be a good thing and a bad thing. And let me go ahead and talk about the good and the bad. And so the good thing about that is that our life is more convenient. Okay, that's the honest truth. It becomes more convenient. And also another thing is that people who are maybe not interested into technology, because it's really like so integrated into our lives, then it might get more people interested in technology. Okay, and specifically for people who are younger. And I think that's really the most important part of this, because whenever I was a kid, when I got into technology, primarily through the Atari, and then through the very first personal computer, the Commodore 64, it really like changed the way I thought. It changed what I really enjoyed doing. Okay, so basically all the way up to adulthood, that has stayed with me. Okay, so you can imagine the children of the modern age, where they grow up with technology at the beginning. And so younger kids having something like this wouldn't be really weird. It would be normal. Whereas whenever I was a kid, when we just like, this is not something that was common. In other words, it's very niche. And even up until your teenage years, and still, like at least from my generation, even younger adults, this is still a very niche thing, especially once again when we were kids. This is not something that was readily available. Okay, and so by having this, I think it'll open a lot of doors, get a lot of children interested into these technologies, and even the parents as well, because they're going to learn how to tinker with this. They're going to learn how to use it in a way that actually not only allows them to learn, but that also actually works in their life. Okay, because I'm pretty sure adults, like myself, if I got one of these, I would learn a lot more about the practical uses of artificial intelligence. Okay, because once I get this hardware set up, I'm going to spend my time focusing on how to get it to work, with what I need. Okay, so that whenever you do something like that, similar to everything that we use on our computer, our operating system, once you figure out the basics, and then you learn all the insides and outs of it in order to get it to work for what you need, that's the part that's really most important, because everybody has different reasons for using these different technologies. And I think with something like this, you learn way more. And maybe after being exposed to something like a Google AIY kit, you might be interested into more things. You might kind of become an engineer in and of yourself. You might start getting more Raspberry Pi hardware or many different other hardware, and by that point you'll understand the basics of how the AI works. And so you might want to get into deeper AI, like open AI. You might want to learn more about deep learning. And so anyway, I think this is a really positive thing overall. And the negative thing, and this really depends on your perspective, it's Google. Okay, and so I love a lot of the things that Google does and provide, but just being realistic, Google and many other companies, Microsoft, Apple, it honestly doesn't matter. They will be able to garner more data from you. Okay, and so that's always a concern. I think with anything nowadays. But you can imagine with something like this, it will hook up to their Google Assistant, their Google AI, and so what that means is they'll be able to collect more data. Okay, and so that's kind of like the issue there, that I think probably some people who are really concerned about their privacy might have issues with here. Okay, and obviously if it is going to be using a lot of open standards, then given enough time, you can make it to where it's not collecting as much data. Okay, and so it just depends on how much time you want to spend. I think that's really the only negative or downside that I could see there, okay? Because I really feel like any company pretty much is going to do something very similar. It's just that Google is known for that, okay? And so it kind of leads me into Nintendo Labo as well. I didn't really plan on talking about this, but I did see that it is available now. Early reviews have come in. I haven't really gone over too many of them yet, but people are really digging this. And I could see why. I mean, you know, Nintendo, for some reason, they're like, I don't know, they're always doing something interesting, okay? And whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you think about Nintendo, you know, you can't really fault them for still trying to be very creative, okay? They always do something that's not the norm, okay? Whereas, you know, something like a Sony PlayStation 4 or Microsoft Xbox One, you kind of know what to expect, okay? Even though I think the Sony platform has the best video games, in terms of like, you know, trying to push the envelope in terms of ingenuity, instead of just simply upgrading the hardware over and over, they really try to do things that I think makes it more enjoyable overall. Okay, and I know that sounds weird, but Nintendo has always been known for that ever since I was a kid, and it really brings in the whole aspect of playing together, okay, sharing with your friends, sharing with your family, being creative at a very young age, and that's something that I think the Nintendo Labo will really, you know, I think it'll really bring it to another level. Even though basically it's just cardboard, it's just really cool. So both of my brothers have a Nintendo Switch, and so I do hope that they get one because that'd be pretty cool. And I myself, I'd probably have to get a Nintendo Switch as well. So maybe later I might do an episode on this on my other channel. I do have a gaming channel. And so I just thought this was really funny. But once again, it really made me think about all these other devices that use these very simple physical pieces to actually create something that is pretty sophisticated underneath. Okay, so, oh wait, let me go back there. All right. Hey, good morning, Joe. How's it going? Thank you for joining. Good morning, Randy. It's Joe saying it's spyware. Yeah, it could be, Joe, and that's kind of like why I want to talk about the negative part of that, because, you know, I mean, they could definitely be collecting data, you know, especially since, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's made to work with their Google Assistant, okay? And so, but once again, I think if people spend enough time, they do have control over that. But the main point of this, in my opinion, is that the reason why I think it's important is because it gets people into technology. You know, it gets people into tinkering. You know, that's kind of why I refer to my own experience as a kid when I had an Atari and then a Commodore. And then obviously after that, it was Windows. You know, I got exposure to Apple Mac. So all of those things expose you to technology. Okay, and that's, to me, that's the most important thing, because one of the goals of my channel is you know, I want to improve lives through technology, okay, because it's improved my life, and since technology is so much a part of our lives today, you know, we have more opportunities to do things with it, okay. And once again, you know, you could go two ways, okay. I mean, for a lot of people, I think for the majority of people, technology is just something that is a convenience that they just happen to use. And I don't really think that's going to change, because most people, unless you're really interested in this stuff, they don't really care how it works underneath. You know, even myself, I mean, it depends on what it is. You know, I don't really, for the most part, it works, and I don't need to know everything behind the scenes. But when you have things like this, or things like Linux, of course, it really, you know, makes you more curious about it. And that curiosity, by having things like this, that's why I think it's important, you know, especially for younger children. You know, if children are exposed to this when they are younger, then, you know, they'll have a lot more, I would say, not only knowledge, but I think as they become adults, they will have a lot more options, because of the fact that, you know, as we all know, if you have technology skills and experience, you know, you have a lot more like options in life, okay. Mainly, first and foremost, that you could actually make money out of it. I mean, I know as a kid that might not be important, but later on, that'll be very important. And if you have technology skills now all the way to the future, those skills are very valuable. And so that's why I think these things, in many ways, they have way more uses than not. Okay, and so Yeah, so Randy's saying Microsoft can just talk Deepin OS for info. Can Oh, you mean tap Deepin OS? Yeah, Deepin. Yeah, I'm not really familiar with that, Randy, because I don't really use other distros myself. I use Linux. But once again, whenever we have things like that, you have a choice. You don't have to use that. You can use something else. Or since you do know more about technology than the average person, then you could tinker with it. Okay, so that's why when I see things like this, I'm like, that's cool. Okay, that's really cool. Now, I didn't realize that, and this has been worked on for a while now. I didn't realize that Google was working on something like this. And obviously, they work on thousands of different projects, and most of them don't make it, because they're testing a lot of things. Okay, and so those are my thoughts on the Google AIY project. I think this is a really cool thing to have, and it will bring hopefully a lot more people, especially younger people, into the world of technology. And I'm really interested, and I have mentioned this before, about where we're going with artificial intelligence, and not just the stuff that we already know about, or maybe things that we are afraid of, such as the artificial intelligence taking over the world, stuff like that. I'm just like really interested how this will apply to, humans, like how this will apply to your everyday life, and so that this is like I think the beginning stages of all this stuff that's going on with artificial intelligence right now. This is at such a early stage and level, and so I can't imagine how far AI will be in even like the next 5 years. I think it'd be pretty amazing, but also scary as well. And so I keep saying this all the time, but I keep thinking about the Terminator movie all the time. Every time I think about the negative sides of it, I think about the Terminator or things like the Matrix. But at the same time, there are a lot of possibilities. And so, yeah, so maybe if I do see this at Target, who knows, I might pick it up. I mean, I was thinking about doing the Raspberry Pi thing anyway, just to kind of learn it. But this would be pretty cool if I get it. And since the hardware and stuff, it's the same hardware, then I could tinker with it myself. I could put in a different OS or different boards connected to different types of boards. And so I'll be interested to see what happens here. So let's go ahead and get to the second bit of news, and that is Microsoft Linux, or it's actually Azure Spear. Okay, now this is something that I have talked about in the past. Okay, now before I get into that, let me briefly go why I said Microsoft Linux. And okay, so the Azure cloud services. Okay, one of the things that it does is, and this happened a while back, that they provided virtualization for Linux operating system, which was the first step. And now with their Azure Spear OS, guess what kernel that they're using? They're using a custom Linux kernel. That is why I wanted to talk about this. That's why I call it Microsoft Linux. And this is something that I've talked about a long time ago. Actually, on my episode 241, I will leave a link in the description below. This is when Microsoft first joined the Linux Foundation. And I did this episode in November of 2016. And I have said this in many episodes that I feel Microsoft will make their own Linux distribution, and they will be one of the largest Linux distribution providers out there. And I think some people might have thought I was crazy for saying that, but here's some of the proof right here. This is where they're heading. Okay, Microsoft joined the Linux Foundation for a reason. They provided Linux services on Azure for a reason, and on my old video, if you watch that, I basically break it down to like Microsoft, they are a very smart company. They run a business, they have very smart people. Okay, so they knew that calling Linux a cancer at the beginning, that might have stopped Linux if it went their way, but it didn't. And so because it didn't go their way, and now Linux is pretty much everywhere, and it makes a lot of money for a lot of businesses, Microsoft decided to leverage Linux. And that's why I feel they will be probably one of the biggest providers of Linux services in the future. And so this is a pretty huge thing in my opinion. Okay, and so let me see what oh, Rose, good morning, thank you so much for joining. And let me see. Spyware Linux Deepen. Oh, hey, good morning, Carlos. Thank you for joining. And so yeah, so they're Microsoft Azure OS. So let's go briefly to see how this works. I just barely read about this, but I know it's been worked on for a while now, and I think some Linux sites already talked about this before. But this is something, like I said, that's why I wanted to show you that episode that I talked about all this stuff. I knew this was something that was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. And so this is primarily for their Microsoft IoT or Internet of Things. Okay, and I talked about this last week where I talked about Automation Linux and how Microsoft IoT is pretty much the main competitor to that. And so Internet of Things, all these smart devices, so all of this stuff is related. Okay, and so there it is. So it's IoT, so that's really what it's meant for right now. Okay, and for IoT devices, that's why I talked about my Automation Linux last week. Most IoT Internet of Things devices, automation devices, they have a Linux based version on there, with the Linux kernel and then a Linux OS on top of it, so they built their own versions on it. And so so Microsoft in this case, they have it both ways. Okay, in one way they are leveraging Linux and all the thousands of people who use it, all the many thousands of developers, and obviously all the huge amounts of money being used from Linux. And so that's one thing. But then the second thing, Microsoft also has their own IoT services as well, such as this. But they also have their Windows version as well on these smaller devices. Okay, and so in this way, Microsoft doesn't lose. In either way that it goes, they're on both ends. And so that's why I think this is so powerful. In terms of the actual technology and stuff, I don't really think it matters, okay? Because in my opinion, they all kind of work the same, okay? But the important thing is here that they're leveraging both their own operating system and services, but also Linux, the Linux community, and so that is a very smart thing. And so what I think is going to happen, and I have mentioned this before, I think the next step for Microsoft is to release their own distro. Okay, and that's something that I have mentioned many times before. But it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but I think next year. Okay, because the Linux distro, it's primarily for people like ourselves. Okay, desktop users, stuff like that. Okay, but what I think is going to happen is once they see the growth in their Linux services that they provide, then I really think now, okay, they could go into the consumer market, which what I really think Linux distros, it's primarily for the consumer market. That's my opinion. Okay, because we already know Linux, the Linux kernel specifically, but it's used in the business world. It's used in the government world. That's why companies like Microsoft focus on those areas first. And Google and Facebook, Apple, they have their own proprietary, but I know they use Linux-based tools as well. But you know what I'm saying. So that's where they go where the money is first. But so the second area that I think they'll go into is the whole consumer market, the desktop market. Okay, so I don't think that either Microsoft Windows or Apple, they really don't make money off their operating systems. And I think everybody knows that nowadays. Where they make money is their ecosystem. Okay, and so now that the ecosystem is where all these companies make money, so if Microsoft, whenever they do release a Linux distro, and I really feel that they will sooner than later because of something like this, this is the first step. And so it wouldn't be really difficult at all for Microsoft to release a Linux distro. And so this is what I think that they're going to do with it, okay? And why I think that they will Microsoft will probably be one of the biggest Linux distros out there, and they have a huge advantage, and let me tell you why. And it's not just the fact that they have a ton of money, okay? And so just imagine, for example, whenever Microsoft releases their Linux distro, okay? So the first thing is it's going to have the Linux kernel. It's going to be Linux GNU. It's going to have all that, all right? And so it's already going to have everything that other Linux distros have, or they could add that because it's open source, right? And so they will already cater to people who already like Linux, okay? But here's the part where they'll be able to offer something that these other Linux distros cannot. That is the Microsoft ecosystem, Okay, so think about it this way. Microsoft releases a Linux distro. It's got everything that Linux users want, and at the same time, since it is a Linux distro, it is open source. Just like all the other distros, you could tinker with it. You could add or take away whatever you want. But here's where Microsoft has an advantage. Now they could provide their Microsoft ecosystem, i.e. their Microsoft Office services, and most importantly, stuff like their video game services. Or maybe they can add a compatibility layer where you will actually be able to run Windows-based software on your Microsoft Windows distro. And since it is Microsoft, they don't have to worry about licensing issues or getting sued by Microsoft because it's Microsoft. And so you could see here where through this Microsoft Windows distro that you could actually run full-blown Windows applications. You could run full-blown Windows games, things, Photoshop, Premiere. They could do all of that because they don't have to worry about any of the legal issues because it's Microsoft. It's their own operating system. And so that's where I feel that this would be extremely powerful because much like the example I showed here, you know, and what I just talked about, you have all the advantages of Linux and none of the disadvantages in terms of like people who will not move over from Windows to Linux. They won't have that issue here. And as I just mentioned, Microsoft really doesn't make money off their operating system. You know, people aren't going out and buying copies of Windows like they used to. You know what I mean? And so that's not where they make their big money. Where they make their big money is through their ecosystem and obviously all the services that they provide through that. Okay, and so that's where, in my opinion, where I feel like whenever Microsoft releases their Linux distro, that's where they're gonna really come in hard. And I think my prediction is whenever they do release their Linux distro, I think there's gonna be a lot of people in the Linux community that will be not happy with that. But the same thing happened when they joined the Linux Foundation. A lot of hardcore Linux users were not happy with that, but now what? You know, now Microsoft is everywhere. And people don't really, you know, there's really not much you could do, honestly, to be honest with you. You know, and so, yeah, it's kind of like the whole Trojan horse thing. Microsoft is the Trojan horse, and they're using Linux as the Trojan horse, you know. And you remember even at that time, before they joined the Linux Foundation, Canonical, you know, was the first one to offer a bash in Windows, you know, through their Windows WSL layer. Okay, so yeah, so that's where we're heading next. I have predicted that before, and now it's going to happen, you know, and that's what's going to happen. And so, yeah, I never thought I'd say that, to be honest with you. Even before they joined the Linux Foundation, I thought, man, I mean, for a long time, I'm like, wow, Microsoft coming to Linux, that's not going to happen. I mean, for years, I thought like, no way. But wow, anyway. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So Joe says, if Microsoft came out with the Linux distro, it would be like Red Star OS. Yeah, Joe, so Red Star OS, if I remember correctly, is that the North Korean version of a Linux distro? Yeah, and also in China, they do have their own distro as well. I think it's China or North Korea. I can't remember. Red Star OS. Rose is saying Microsoft will no doubt will buy out Canonical. Ubuntu is now starting to act like Microsoft with the future release of 18.04. You know, Rose, I think you're right. I do agree with you. I think Microsoft will buy Canonical. You know, because they're already in partnerships anyway. They're already doing a lot of stuff together. You know what? I think that would really make sense that they buy out Canonical. If not Canonical, they will be a large investor in Canonical. Okay, so Randy say Microsoft is losing a lot of money when it comes to server software. Well, Randy, I thought so too, but if you actually look a little bit further, they're still making a ton of money. Okay, because you know, there's a lot of services and that run on Microsoft products. Okay, and if you've ever worked at a large company in corporate IT, it's not easy for you to just, hey, we don't want to use this operating system, or let's wipe it out, let's use another service. It's not easy at all. You know, that's why we have a lot of these legacy system and servers, which are still running, you know, systems from the 1960s and 70s. Okay, if you have done any type of programming, you probably heard of COBOL. Okay, and that is still in some of these old servers, you know, these old Unix servers. And so, yeah, I don't think they're going anywhere, Randy, in the server market, but obviously their market share is nowhere near as high as it was prior to Linux coming onto the scene. So, yeah. Microsoft, okay, Bros is saying Microsoft is a virus destroying everything in their path like a cancer. That's so funny, Rose. Yeah, you turned that around. Linux is a cancer. Well, Microsoft is a cancer. Oh, okay. So English Bob. Hey, English Bob. Thank you for joining. English Bob, if you didn't know, he has an amazing Linux channel. I have been watching his channel for a very long time. Thank you so much, English Bob, for joining. English Bob is one of the, if you didn't know, please go check out his channel. Thank you, English Bob, for joining, by the way, first and foremost. English Bob is one of the channels that I actually went to before I ever did anything on YouTube, and he really inspired me a lot to do these type of Linux videos. So thank you so much, English Bob, for joining. And so English Bob is saying, Microsoft's plan is to have a Linux system which shows all your domestic products. They're not interested in desktop. Yeah, English Bob, as I mentioned, I think the desktop market would be the second one, and it's not really to conquer the desktop market, but it's primarily to offer more of their ecosystem. That's my opinion, because I really feel that's what's going to happen. Okay, and why wouldn't they anyway? Because why not? I mean, if they're going to try to conquer every area as much as they can, and so that's kind of why I know that's going to happen, because it is an opportunity for them. Okay, and like I said, I don't see why they wouldn't. And they have a lot of resources, and so. So Joe is saying, why would anyone want spyware, malware from Microsoft? Well, Joe, that's the thing. I mean, because a lot of people already use it, and I don't think the majority of people who use their computer, they're not geeks and nerds. I mean, although there are a lot of geeks and nerds that just use it every single day, I think the majority of people, they don't care. As long as it provides the service that they need. That's why I even mentioned myself. I don't know. I'm not interested in everything, and so I think for a lot of people, they just use it. Okay, that's bottom line, and so they don't really know what's underneath, and most of the time people don't care anyway, and that's why, people use things like Microsoft Windows and Apple Mac OS, because I mean, if you've never used anything outside of that, I could see why you would stick with it. It's just convenient, That's my opinion on that one. And so, hey, good morning, Gaza. Thank you so much for joining. And, okay, so let me see. Microsoft wants everything. English Bob said, doubt it very much, as Microsoft idea is to lock into the Azure platform. That way they can farm all your data from everything. Yeah, and I think, English Bob, that gets into the point that, and a lot of us have talked about this before, where it's the ecosystem. And once they get you into the ecosystem, you are locked. Okay, in a lot of ways, because a lot of what you do, and that's why the ecosystem is so important, and that's why I really think companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all of them, they all do the same thing, and it makes sense. Okay, that's why it's so important for them to get people in the ecosystem early, and then to keep them in there, because if you try to move from one ecosystem to another, it's really, really difficult, and that's why, for example, so many Apple users, they don't really move over to other platforms, because out of all the providers out there, Apple has, I would say, that the most tightly controlled and the best ecosystem when it comes to keeping people in it. Okay, hands down, they do the best at that. And so you could see real world examples of that. It's really difficult to move out of it, But if you're the person who uses Linux, then to be honest with you, it's not difficult, because I go from Linux to Windows to Mac, Android, no problem, but that's different. Most people aren't able to do that. Okay, but if people, that's why I mentioned this AI project at the beginning. If people start with something early on where they are learning more about technology, then maybe most people would start off using something like a Linux based desktop operating system first, and then because of that, they will be more flexible. Okay, I always believe in choice. And I'm not that type of person. I have said this before. I'm not like a one or the other. I don't choose proprietary or open source. I just choose what works best for me, and I like to have that choice. And so I think a lot of times, if you start off with the ecosystems like an Apple Mac OS or a Microsoft Windows, I think a lot of times that you don't see the other choices out there. Whereas if you started with something like a Linux desktop operating system, then you are more open to different choices and options, because in the Linux world, it's not just one or the other. It's so many different parts, and you could choose what you wanted, and you learn more about it. And so let me see. Let me see what else is saying. Okay. Um, Microsoft wants everything. Yeah, okay. So well said, Geek. Sound a lot like EB. Yeah. Randy is saying, my son works at Dell and Linux is on more and more today. He told me serves that is. Yeah, Randy, that's a really good point because I did work at Dell as well, but as an intern when I was in college. I was actually in Austin, Texas, and this was years ago, Randy. I'm so glad you mentioned that because at the time, Dell, when it first started, if people are maybe too young to know how Dell started, it started with Michael Dell. He was going to college in Texas, and he basically started a computer service company outside of his dorm room. Okay, so it was just in time processing. Okay, so you would order your computer, they would build it, and they would send it out to you. That was a new thing. But then what happened over the years was Dell became more of a service provider, and so a lot of where their money is made was no longer through them selling consumer products, computers to people. A lot of their money was made through providing services through their Dell servers. Okay, and at the time when I did my internship at Dell, they were running Linux, and Linux was not it was not very common. And so, thank you, Randy, for pointing that out. And Dell was one of the first major companies to really use Linux on a large scale, besides other companies like IBM. I think IBM was pretty huge when it came to Linux, you know. Oh, okay, Rose got to go. Thank you, Rose. Thanks for joining. Guys are saying for blue chip corporations, it's defaulted to primarily an audit requirement to run Microsoft ecosystem. Although that being said, there's argument that ignorance is paramount in decision making. Well, guys, I think like for companies, it's and you know this, you know, it's really difficult to make those type of decisions because it's widespread. And like you said, you know, there are certain requirements and agreements. Like I said, you just can't, if you work in a corporate IT, like I said, you just can't like delete your entire operating system, put something else on it. Because number one, it would be very difficult. If you think about the technical part, if you think about a large company, they have millions or billions of people using their services. That's not going to happen. And then secondly, there's a lot of legal issues behind that. You know, you simply cannot just stop using something, especially if they have license agreements to it, then they could get sued. And so, yeah, but I will say this, and we see right here with Microsoft that they know that Linux is something that they must have. And so that's the good part of it, you know, guys. I mean, that's the good part of Linux is that you can use it however you want. But what I love about it is since Microsoft and other companies were not able to basically destroy Linux in its early infant stages, now Microsoft has to use Linux. And so I've always said this, honestly, even if Microsoft, Apple release their own distro, as long as Linux is still open source and it's not going anywhere, as I have said that before, my opinion, I'm thinking like the positive end of it, more people will be exposed to Linux. Okay, Linux as the kernel, as the community, Linux GNU as the operating system, whatever the case might be, it will introduce more people to it. Okay, so the positive side of Microsoft doing this is, say for example, you wanted to use this Azure Spear OS service, right? Let's just think about it on a positive way, right? You wanted to learn how to use Azure Spear OS. Well, since it runs on a Linux kernel, you have to learn about Linux, right? And so if somebody wanted to be an Azure Spear OS administrator in the future, they have to learn Linux. And so that's the good point of it is, okay? And so that's the way I think about things. For me, as long as it is free, it doesn't have to be free, but as long as it's open source, the community keeps growing, it's not going anywhere. These big companies are pumping billions of dollars into the entire Linux ecosystem. That's a good thing. That's the way I see it. Okay. Obviously, the negative point is these larger companies will have more control, will have more influence. But once again, I just think it's got to the point now where, in the end, it's not going to matter as much as we think it is. Okay, that's my opinion. Okay, if it gets more people in the Linux and the open source community, I'm happy. You know, that's my thing. You know, but I think like for people who are really interested, or kind of concerned about all the privacy thing and you know, the amount of control they have, then that's really on you. You know, you're gonna have to see what works best for you. You might have to learn more about controlling your system. But anyway, my feeling is if it gets more of Linux out there, then that's cool. You know, Joe is saying I'm not a geek or a nerd. Hey, Atlantis Peloff, thank you for joining. I think Microsoft is going to try to obtain Linux. Atlanta, obviously Linux is not controlled by any one entity, but I think Rose mentioned it earlier that I could easily see them purchasing Canonical. And Canonical and Red Hat, they're the two largest in the whole Linux business side of things. Okay, and so if they were able to purchase Canonical or have a large partnership with them, then they would definitely have a lot more influence in the Linux community. And so I think whenever, and I don't know if I just mentioned this a little bit earlier, but whenever they release the Linux distro, I think a lot of people will really hate the Linux distro. That's my opinion. There's going to be a lot of hate, but maybe after like a few months, a year later, when now you could play Microsoft video games on your Linux distro full blown with no restrictions, and that's just speaking of a consumer side. And then from a productivity business side, say for example you use Adobe Premiere, well now you can use Adobe Premiere and Photoshop in your Microsoft Linux distro. Or if you are developing things in the whole Windows ecosystem, that software is only available there, and now you can use this Microsoft Linux distro and you can do the same things, then that's going to completely change the game. You know, and then that's kind of where I see things going. And if honestly, if it was me, I would do the same thing. You know, I would do the same thing. But anyways, so Peloff, when Microsoft does that, I would switch to using BSD. Guys are saying BSD, LOL. And I don't know much about BSD, but BSD is what's used underneath for Apple's macOS. Guys saying go from Linux to BSD is an easy move. Randy saying Windows is a BSD LMAO. Okay, so let's say Microsoft is on the Linux board of directors, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, they're actually a part of the Linux Foundation, Atlanta. Let me go there. And they are actually, the largest companies are actually the biggest providers in the whole Linux community. They're the largest. If you look at all their partners, it's going to be the biggest companies in the world. It's not going to be individuals like me and you. It's going to be large companies, okay? And so, and I have showed this to other people who have been on my channel before. So if you look here at the Linux Foundation, the Platinum members, there's Microsoft, okay? But there's all of these are multi-billion-dollar companies. You're not going to see small individual people like me and you here, okay? And it makes sense. Why? Yeah, they have billions of dollars, so they could provide more to the Linux Foundation, okay? And just think about the business end, okay? So these are the companies that you're going to actually work with the most. And there's Dell right there. Facebook obviously is there. And so the largest companies in the world are a part of Linux. And so, and I've mentioned this before, that's a good thing and a bad thing. You know, the good thing is Linux isn't going anywhere because there's so much money tied up to it. The bad thing is they're going to have a lot of influence, okay, whether indirectly or directly. That's just the name of the game, okay? But you can see there, a lot of big companies, all corporate companies from all around the world, okay? So I think that's it for my two main topics. And so we have about 15 minutes left. So we can do some Q&A or just other geek stuff that I'm interested in or that y'all want to talk about. So let me see. So Randy says, so when will be the year of Linux? You know, Randy, I think the year of Linux is right now. And the reason I say that is just what I mentioned earlier, because Linux is everywhere. It's everywhere. And so, I think what you're saying is, when is the year of the Linux desktop? I don't think that's ever going to happen. Okay, this is kind of weird. If whenever Microsoft releases their Linux distro, and if it happens in a way I think it's going to happen, where now most mass consumers could run Windows programs in a Linux distro, then it would be the year of the Linux distro. And that is so weird to say that. I never thought I'd say that, but it could truly become the year of the Linux distro because of Microsoft. That's crazy. But if everything happens the way I think it's going to happen, okay, then we will have the year of the Linux desktop. But it's going to be through Microsoft. It's crazy. Okay, so Gaza, thank you so much for joining. Lance, thank you for joining. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Okay, and so yeah, so that's kind of it. That's the only thing that I had to talk about this week. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I was thinking about. Oh yeah, I did want to mention one thing. If you haven't seen a previous episode I did this week, I did install Lineage OS, and maybe I'll leave a link somewhere in the description below. And it was my first time using Lineage OS, so if you haven't seen that episode, be sure to check it out. And let me see what episode it is. Yeah, right here, episode 673. This is when I actually installed this on my phone, and I'm actually going to be doing a full review of Lineage OS later on, hopefully next week, as I'm learning how to use this. But so far, I'm really digging it. I really enjoy this OS because it's been a really long time that I've actually put a custom ROM on my Android device, and it's pretty awesome, and about the only thing that is challenging right now is I myself am into an ecosystem. I'm in multiple ecosystems as well, and so I myself I'm pretty much tied to the Google ecosystem. Okay, obviously I'm on YouTube, right? And so for a lot of things, I still need to use their services. Okay, so I'm not one of those people who could completely disconnect myself from these ecosystems because I use it every single day. Okay, and so Atlantis is saying I love and hate Microsoft at the same time. Me too. Me too, Atanas. Yeah, I'm the same way. I love and hate them at the same time, And so, Lance, did you put a SIM card in and have it work for call stuff? Not yet, Lance. That's why I need about a week or so to actually learn how to use it. So then I could do a full review on it, okay? I have multiple Android phones, and so it's not going to affect me, much at all. However, my main phone, I'm just going to leave it whatever the version of Android that I have on there. But my other phones, I'm gonna experiment with Lineage OS. It's pretty straightforward, I think, But what I do like about Lineage OS so far is that it's a really clean version of Android. It's actually really fast. As we all know this, right? I mean, if you put a custom ROM onto your Android device, and this is very similar to the Linux desktop, your performance is usually going to be better because it doesn't have all this bloat, and at the same time, there's also this planned obsolescence. It wouldn't be weird for you to think that in their operating system they would make planned obsolescence on your phone as well. And so my Moto G phone, which is from 2013, it is running faster, which is pretty cool. Okay, so look forward to a future full review. I just need some time, Lance, to actually try it out, try phone calls on it, basically see how I could really use this OS. And so I'm pretty happy about it. And hats off to the Lineage OS team. And for people who are watching who might not be familiar with what I'm talking about, and I really got to thank all the people who are actually on my channel, because a lot of the people on this channel, we have a lot of people from different backgrounds, but a lot of the people come to my channel, they come to my channel because of a lot of the Linux content that I provide. However, I am not a Linux expert, even though I've used Linux for more than 10 years. I actually use it primarily as an everyday user. I just wanted to replace Windows, okay? That's my story in a nutshell, okay? But I really I'm so happy that we have a Linux community here, that they provide me a lot of ideas. And so basically, a lot of people who are on this chat right now, they are the ones that recommended that I use Lineage OS. Okay, I didn't know about it before. The last time I actually flashed my phone, I was using CyanogenMod, and Lineage OS was actually created by some developers from the original CyanogenMod team, or from the CyanogenMod team. CyanogenMod is no longer there as a company. But yeah, Lineage OS, check it out, y'all. It's free. Okay, so you can come here, come to downloads, and they pretty much have pretty much every manufacturer, at least the main manufacturers on here. So come check it out. I just want to thank all the people here who really recommended this, because I was not happy with my older Android phones. I'm not even happy with this phone. I haven't upgraded yet. This is the LG G5. The OS that they have, the version of Linux they have on there is horrible. The performance has gotten so much worse. And I have mentioned this before, where I really feel Android is becoming more like Windows, and that's really, I don't think that's really not the fault of, say, Google particularly, okay, but it's just like a lot of these companies, they, since it is a open source, you know, they just like put a lot of stuff on there that's bloat, okay, a lot of things that I don't want, okay. And I think one of the biggest offenders is people like companies like Samsung. That's why I don't have a Samsung phone, even though I think Samsung's hardware is the best. I really do not like their version of Android, okay. And even LG's version of Android, it's a performance hog, you know. And at the same time, as these Android phones get older and older, the OS, it just slows everything down. And I think anybody who uses Android, they'll know. And once again, I don't think that's the fault of Android, because if you use stock Android or you use some of this custom ROM, just like with what I did with my older phone, it runs better. Okay, and so if I had to blame it, I blame the companies, and that's why I really feel like it's becoming more like Microsoft Windows, because Microsoft Windows, it's, I mean, at some points you can say it's the operating system, but really it's the provider of the operating system. In this case, it's just Microsoft, okay? Anyway, that's kind of like my rant on that, but I'm so happy that I do have Lineage OS on there right now. And so maybe, you know, if I, you know, once I go through and use this regularly, and if I enjoy it a lot, and I feel confident that I could use this as my main driver, then I might just go ahead and flash this as well. Or if I get a new phone, then I'm definitely going to flash this and put Lineage OS on there. And so that's it for that. And since we have 7 minutes left, one bit of entertainment news. Avengers Infinity War is coming out next week. So I don't know if any of you are interested in that. I myself am burnt out on comic book movies, but that's one movie I definitely want to see. And so, yeah. Anyway, if there's nothing else, I will go ahead and close off this episode. So first, let's go ahead and thank everybody who's actually on here. All right. So first, Joe Johnson, thank you for joining. Randy Blankenship. Rose, as always. Rose, been here a long time. Carlos Enrique, thank you so much for joining. And who else? Of course, English Bob, thank you. And thank you so much, English Bob, for joining our community and, you know, adding to the chat. I appreciate it. And once again, if you've not seen English Bob's channel, go check it out. You know, he's done so much in the whole Linux world, on YouTube especially. So go check out the channel. And Gaza M, thank you so much, Gaza, for joining. Another veteran of the channel. And Lance, of course. Lance has been here a long time. And Atlanta at Atanas Belov, thank you so much for joining the discussion. And thank you for everyone else who is actually watching this right now, or who watches any of this later on, because, you know, I try to say this every single episode, but our time is the most important and valuable asset that we have. And I really do appreciate all of you for spending your time here, geeking out with us in this geeky discussion. And if you had any thoughts about anything that I talked about today, whether it's Google's AIY or Microsoft Azure OS, be sure to leave that in the comments area below. And as always, if you did get value out of these videos, be sure to subscribe. And if you did want to support my channel further, you could do that at patreon.com/geek.